All right, another totally rewarding chats along with Paul. Paul, that is, I'm a little disappointed. Nothing on the whiteboard today. Been too busy to be creative.
That's what happens when we record in the morning. You've caught me sort
Oh,
of out of routine.
so you're gonna say it's on me?
Yep,
Uh,
tabula rasa.
Yeah.
yeah. And that is Cary Sparrow, CEO and founder of Wagescape. How are you?
Great, great.
Okay.
Love
So,
talking with you guys.
so just for those, he's also a good person. Does contradictory to the fact that he likes to talk to Paul and I, but he is also a good person. So which we'll learn more about here. So instead of us butchering your background, Cary, can you give us your background, as far back as you want to go, up through, now at Wage?
Sure. So I founded Wagescape 10 years ago with the very nerdy and lofty goal of bringing more transparency to the labor market. And that kind of fits my own personality, that sometimes are detached from reality. Prior to that, I was in corporate America. I was a global exec at a really big global company, responsible for upgrading their workforce management infrastructure in about 70 different countries. And prior to that, I was a managing partner at one of the big consulting firms. And before that, I was a submarine officer in the U.S. Navy. So I knew how to run nuclear reactors and go and do spooky stuff. Background's engineering, and now I'm back to engineering. I run a company that's a big data company, and we provide data that tells you what's going on with things like pay and hiring and skills and things like that.
That's great. We need a couple things to see if you're human for the speed run. Hobby. What do you do outside of work? You're a CEO and founder, which means I'm sure there's not a lot of
Yeah.
time.
Hobbies?
But yeah.
They've been kind of fluid lately. I just, my kids are at the age where they like going to theater now with us, with my wife and me. So we go to theater more often than we used to. Just went and saw a great tribute show to Fleetwood Mac. And prior to that, a great tribute to Neil Diamond. And so we like music too, obviously. Just got my son a vinyl record player,
Ooh.
trying to get him hooked on that. When the weather's warm enough, I live in Minneapolis, and so the weather's cooling down a little bit right now. But when it's warm enough, I love being outside and biking. We love traveling. So, we have a few, but none that we devote a specific number of hours a day or
It's the portfolio of interests.
Yeah,
That's the way to
portfolio of
frame
interests.
that.
The vinyl is interesting for your kids because I had to take a trip from the Northeast to Tulsa last year, and I had to drive, which I took the trailer while I was driving for vinyl records. She had so many vinyl records at home, and you can't ship them. You can't, like, when you think about actually moving them somewhere, that becomes a thing. And in retrospect, we should have made him take that crap with her when she left the first time. But it is cool to see, actually, I'll say, now I sound like an old man, the younger generation digging vinyl, getting the vinyl players and listening and watching vinyl.
My daughter, when she was in college, she got bit by the vinyl bug. And I didn't even know that was a thing, but it started coming back pretty hard. And then when she was home on a break, she's like, "Hey, can I listen to some of your records?" I was like, "Okay, but put them back." Right? And then when she's getting ready to go back to school, she's like, "Do you mind if I take these with me?" I'm
Her
like,
collection
"Yes,
got bigger.
You cannot, you cannot. Those will not leave the house. They're mine."
Yes, I do mind. Yes. Yeah. So we do a speed round of questions. So tea or coffee?
Coffee, decaf. I don't do caffeine, and so it's hard to find decaffeinated tea, and so I drink decaf coffee.
Okay. But you like the taste of coffee? Is that you just can't,
Yeah.
you don't want the caffeine?
Yeah. Black, no cream.
Black, no cream. The furthest you've been under the water in the submarine? This is a question I've been dying to ask for a while. What's
If you're allowed to talk about it, like there might be some secrecy here.
Yeah.
Over
Over 400 feet. Okay. I'd have probably taken the over. I always think submarines go way down, but
Yeah.
Okay, below 400 feet. How's that?
okay, that's all he's allowed to say, Paul, or he'll have to kill us. If we don't air the rest of this podcast, everyone will know that he told us.
He may have been a mile underwater. It's just below 400. It's the Jedi hand
It's
wave
below
of submarine
400
depths.
feet. You have a weekend away. Do you want to go spend it at a posh weekend resort, or do you want to go rough it and camp in the woods?
Oh, a posh resort, because I'd want my wife to be with me, and she doesn't do camping anymore. She did it a ton as a kid, and now she doesn't do it anymore. So,
You know what? I'm going to
So if
go
we
and
ever
just roll with that. The fact that your wants just were thrown right out, and you were like, you know what? I mean, I'll take it as a positive too. You want to spend time with your wife. That you were like, nope, she's not going camping, so I'm not going camping.
And if we ever catch Cary at a Jellystone RV park, we know there's a reason for this. Like
That's right.
he's chosen to
There's
get
a
away
whole,
from
this
the
is a
fam.
whole dialogue. This is an ongoing thing. This is like, I would love, when I finally kind of hang up my spurs, I think it'd be really cool to rent like a 40-foot RV and go tour, all over North America. And she says, well, let me know when you get to someplace civilized and I'll come meet you.
She'll fly and hop to you along the way. I think that's a smart strategy. I like your wife already.
Well, and you're thinking 40 feet. That's huge. So that's a big trailer.
I don't, I have certain standards.
It's got to fit the vinyl.
I think that as I speak to you from my 20-foot trailer, I won't say anything about the standard. People can just infer.
That's right.
Top place you'd like to visit that you haven't been?
Antarctica.
Can't go there in the RV. It's a different trip.
I used to work for a company that, as I mentioned, had operations all over the world. And so I went through literally 3 entire books of passports in 7 years while I was there. So I've seen a lot. I haven't been to Africa and I haven't been to Antarctica. I'd pick Antarctica first, and then I would love to go to Egypt and all kinds of places in Africa as well.
Yep. Which, to be fair, is going to be hard in the 40-foot RV. So you're going to have to bust out some plane tickets probably.
Then I'd rent one.
Yeah. Problem solver. And the last important one, are you a crunchy or creamy peanut butter person?
I'm allergic to peanuts, so neither.
Do you do a peanut butter? So my son is as well. Do you do like a sun butter, almond butter, or you just like, that's just not a genre you play in as a result?
No.
You're just out?
Anything that even has a hint of peanut flavor or smell,
You're like, forget it.
I stay away from.
Yeah.
Okay.
Wise choice.
Okay.
It's a risk management approach.
A wise choice. He's still here, so yes. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
Navigating it well for.
Yeah, I grew up long before they had all these warnings about peanuts and everything. Nobody had ever heard of a kid that was allergic to peanuts. And I learned very quickly that nobody else was looking out for me on this question, so I had to look out for myself.
Whereas my 11-year-old son has grown up in a world where he knows to flip over every label and look for sort of the giant thing on it. Like before he could read any other word, he knew what peanut looked like because he was trained very quickly to look for those warnings.
Yeah, for sure. Luckily, I don't have that. And we don't have anyone in the house. I think that's the other thing, too, is like how it affects others with making stuff and other things. So it's always interesting. I've had to add that to when I do online polls for it, the allergic or just don't like buttons, because I used to be like, how are we not getting to 100%? But, you got those that just don't. So let's get to the important stuff. So let's talk about data. And so we've talked a lot on a couple different episodes. There's so many different types of data out there. So let's start with your kind of data, the data that you guys do, scraped, grabbed. How do you guys phrase it? And then talk about kind of the process you go through and how it's different to what would be traditional surveys as a starting point. And then we'll just kind of roll from there.
Yeah. So a big part of our business is real-time labor market data that we get from online sources like career sites and others. We collect data from, the number is now over 700,000 different career sites, some of the big aggregators, most of them, though, individual corporate sites. And we compile that every single day. And so we call that, when we extract the intelligence about pay, first of all, we call it expected pay and we call it advertised pay. So it's expected because in that case, it's what companies expect to pay for the positions that they're hiring for, as opposed to survey data, which is about pay for incumbents in those positions. And it's advertised pay because that's where it's coming from. It's coming from job ads. Scraped is one of the methods that's used to get the data, but frankly, there's others. We do, direct feeds off places and things like that. So we don't rely as much as we used to when we started with having, like millions of bots going out and crawling sites. We still do some of that, but not as much anymore. So that's kind of what we do. And the benefits of that are you get to see, first of all, it's completely transparent. There's no laws around like safe harbor or anything like that mean that you have to hide, what company the data is coming from. You don't have to lag the data. So folks really like the fact that they can see who the hiring organization is. They can see exactly what the position requires. They can see it as of yesterday or last week. So it's very, very real time. Another benefit is just scale. When you're set up to, don't have to curate individual sources submitting individual surveys or batches of surveys. we curate populations of, like right now in the US, we're tracking about 14 million ads a month. Worldwide, it's about 40 million. We're tracking data from about 240 countries and large territories around the world. So basically everywhere. And we get expected pay data on about 95% of every job that we track. And so at that scale, one of the things that scale provides is a really high definition lens. Zoom in on any location to the extent if they're hiring in that location, then you can, or have been hiring in the last year or so, then you can see what's going on there, because we're a source that pretty much, tracks nearly everything that's going on. And that's a bit different. A lot of surveys have real limitations in terms of local visibility. In order to create it, you have to kind of do this like synthetic aperture approach where you're cobbling together, surveys from multiple sources to get what you want. The drawbacks are not drawbacks. Limitations are, it's not curated the same way surveys are, right? So you don't have standard job definitions. You don't have a job architecture that a firm slots in all the different survey responses into. So you kind of have to infer yourself what is going on there. And so what we do is we collect all that data and then we enrich it. We, just in English-speaking countries, we've tracked close to 80 million distinct job titles in our data set, which is interesting but useless when it comes to doing any kind of analysis on what's going on in the market, right? And so consolidating that down into a job catalog and we have different flavors of job catalogs, but our core taxonomy has about 6,500 jobs in it. And so one of the things that we do, and one of the things that anyone who deals with advertised pay rates should expect from their provider, is that they consolidate that data into a common job catalog. Another thing we do is we apply a level framework to it. We reduce the obvious noise, but there's a lot of noise in job ad data because it's coming from literally millions of sources with individuals. And, so then we curate the pay also. A lot of folks, want to know exactly where pay is coming from. Basically, if you're getting data, advertised pay rate data, and you're seeing really high, a high volume of data for the vast majority of sources, not ours, that's being generated by some AI model. And so, and there's no transparency around that. And for certain communities, like the recruiting community, that's generally okay. But for the comp community, that's absolutely not okay. You want to understand exactly where things are coming from, because you need very reliable kind of chain of custody around where's the data coming from. Otherwise, if you're not using AI, then you're seeing really low sample rates, because even with pay transparency laws coming into effect in a number of places, we're still looking at 15 to 20% of ads that have printed pay ranges in them. And so, that's one of the things to think about is depending on the source. Ours, because we go with so many different sources, we're able to consolidate data from lots of different sources. We're able to boost those rates way up. But most people, give you what's printed in the ad, and you're missing an awful lot by doing that. The other thing is you get a range, and the typical range, can be plus or minus 25%. I mean, the average is like plus or minus 16 or 17%, which is a huge range. You can hide a lot of sins in ranges that wide. And so one of the things that we do, and we do particularly well, is we are transparent about the ranges, but then we also help narrow those ranges down. And there's other stuff too, like, extracting industry information and extracting location information and extracting skills and putting the skills into a framework. There's a lot of enrichment that happens with the data. And if a lot of folks are like, well, I can just go out and look at that data, myself. And you can go out and look at, any of the big aggregators, Indeed or LinkedIn or any of the others, and say, okay, well, here's what it looks like is going on. But if you really want to know what's going on in the market, you need lots of data, and you need a way to consolidate that into a useful, organized, and rich framework.
So, Cary, a couple of follow-ups. Appreciate that. I think one is I really appreciate that you're careful in your labeling of the data. As you know, one of my big points is with different data sources, you need to be clear on what is it measuring, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I appreciate you're open about the fact that this data does not represent the same thing as like a full census population of what workers are paid. It's advertised rates of pay. And does that mean it's higher? Does that mean it's lower? No, it means it's different, right? And like, let's interpret it as a different source. That's sort of thing one. I'm curious, you started this 10 years ago. I might consider you the OG of the posting data sort of
We're
space.
not, by the way. There's a couple of other firms that started before us, but I think they were not exclusive to this kind of data, and we started off that way. Yeah.
That's that's a much clearer definition. So it's changed a lot in those 10 years. So I
Yeah, it
guess
sure has.
talk a little bit about how the data, like your sourcing, is that what's resulted in this, large corpus of new sources? Is now there's more publishing? Like, how are you even trying to get at posted or advertised data 10 years ago when, if it's 15% of postings now, it was a lot smaller 10 years ago. So I guess talk a little bit about the evolution of posting data and what you've learned in that sort of decade of progress.
It's interesting. When I founded the company, I did not have at all a vision that we would go and get advertised data. I had a vision that we would go and do deals with ATSs and payroll providers and online, cloud-based HRIS providers, and we would extract data that way and consolidate it, do it in an anonymized way, and that's how we would do it. And in order to build a proof of concept, we needed a data source, so we built crawlers. It turns out that we were really good at that, and so we built crawlers and got a lot of data. And we were shopping the concept around, and very quickly realized that at that point in time, our business concept was dead in the water. And the reason why it was dead in the water was because no one was going to share their data, because contractually they had signed agreements with all of their clients saying they wouldn't share their data.
Gotcha.
And so they sure weren't going to share it with some new upstart. But in the process, when we were talking with investors and other potential partners and other technology firms and users, they're like, well, why do you need that? This is good enough. The job ad data tells us something we didn't have before, and you should just take it to market. And we said, okay, let's test that out. And sure enough, it worked. There were firms out there that wanted that kind of data because it told them stuff that, if you're an analyst and you're heavy into like big data and what's going on in the market, and you work for a company that's one of the big consulting firms, or it's one of the big enterprises, so you want a lot of data because you got lots of locations or lots of different clients. Our data is perfectly suited for that, and that's who you saw as our earliest adopters: big enterprises, big consulting firms, not applications. But that was 10 years ago, and since then it's evolved, and it reached kind of a pitch at the pandemic. It was interesting at the pandemic because we were sitting on top of a view of what's happening with hiring. You guys remember that entire supply chains shut down, and other supply chains couldn't find people fast enough, right? And we're sitting on top of the data saying, here's where they're hiring the most. Here's where, down to the individual companies, like within a sector, to say, these are the ones who stopped hiring but have started back up again. And here are the ones that are still not hiring 6 months later. And so you could see what was going on in real time there. But you listen to what was going on, and you listen to 5 different supposed experts, and you get 5 completely different views of what was happening in the economy. And we took back and said, the reason this is happening is because nobody can see data that actually says what's going on. So we evolved as a company to, instead of just being a only data as a service company, in other words, we only sold access to our data, we didn't have applications. We started introducing applications that allowed people to query our database directly and see, with graphs and business intelligence capabilities, what was going on. And that actually had a lot of initial interest, but very limited commercial success. So this is a really evolving space. And I would say that where we are now with advertised pay rates is you've got different audiences that have very different needs. Two of the obvious ones are like, pick 2 of the obvious ones, but some of them include educators, economists, folks that support, government policy, recruiters in the human capital space, compensation teams in the human capital space, folks that do, like the financial services groups that are, that audience that's looking at signals around, business outlook and things like that. But let's just pick the 2 in the human capital space, recruiters and compensation. And Sean, we were talking about this a little bit, that the data needs of those 2 groups are dramatically different. The comp folks want very transparent, very precise, very controllable data. They want to know all the way down to, each individual data element and where its source is and how to interpret it. So probably the most demanding and yet one of the least financially enabled audiences that there is. Whereas the recruiters, who have more money than the comp folks, but still not a lot of money, They don't need that level of precision. They need to know roughly what's going on in the market. They love the fact that they can see what individual companies are doing, because then they can say, that's their business, and that's also where their talent sources are. If somebody's 6 months or a year ago hired for certain positions, then they have people like that. And so there's lots of different uses, but they don't need the same level of precision. It's like, comp folks need to hit an archery bullseye from 150 yards, and the recruiters need to hit the broadside of a barn. And so there's very, very, very different needs, and that's different than it was before. And so while the range of audiences and the range of use cases has gone up over, especially the last 5 years, last 3 years, last year, the needs have become a lot more distinct, which means that the solutions are also becoming, I think, more fit for purpose. We're seeing way more interest now in folks that either want something that they can build into an existing process. Like we just launched, instead of a tool, we launched an actual, what we're calling a survey of advertised pay rates for the comp audience. And so it's updated monthly, every job in our job catalog, every metro area in the US, it'll expand globally, updated monthly. And you can see the pay ranges, you can see the changes period over period. You can see level offsets, industry offsets, things just like you can with an ordinary survey. And the reason that we did that was because we had heard back that, folks now don't have to buy into whether this data is useful, but it doesn't really, if we sell it as a separate app or we sell it as some data set that they have to go query, it doesn't really fit in their everyday process, right? So we need something that fits in their everyday process, and something also that frankly is identified in their everyday budget structure, right? And so selling them a tool, gets in the category of a technology, whereas selling them a survey gets in the category of a survey.
So
And
it's taking posting data and putting it in the form factor, essentially.
exactly. So
a
instead
comp
of going
survey.
in and drilling all the way down to the individual postings, which they can do, by the way, that's just not what this survey offers. It is already pre-aggregates all the data. It washes out all the noise. It handles all of that, so you can just integrate it right in with other surveys. And people know this is not the same as survey data. And I just gave a lecture on this the other day. I mean, to give you an example of why it's not the same as survey data, it's not just that it's coming from different places and represents different things, but you can get different behaviors out of it. For example, because it's basically representative of what's going on, in real time with supply and demand, you can have a dynamic where in a given month, the offset for an entry level is actually higher than the offset for a senior level, and vice versa, right? Because that just happens to be, in that metro, who's hiring at that particular point in time and what what that is around it. So it's not measuring the worth of the job in general. It's measuring what's in the market right now.
Right. We often say it's what somebody wants to pay, right? Because there's no standard rubric for what you post, right? It's
Yeah,
possible I'm
exactly.
posting min to mid. It's possible I'm posting full range. And I know providers like you, bring some intelligence to help
Yeah.
normalize to an extent, but there is still a little bit of variability around why do I want to pay that? Is that I think I need to pay more for this job, in which case it's going to creep up against my population? Is it I think I've got leverage and I could pay a little bit less? It's going to creep down. Like there's some first derivative effects that you're kind of measuring with a posting compared to, a census of data, which is fine. It's what makes it different, right? But it's not consistently viewed as it's higher or it's lower. It's that it's
It's
different.
different. Right. That's exactly right. It's what's being presented. I mean, if you put yourself in the position of who's consuming that data, it's primarily job seekers, right? And job seekers, by the way, could be your own employees. And so it's what's being presented in the market for that job. So if you go in with that mindset, then the usefulness of it becomes, I think, a lot clearer. So it's an early warning about where there might be upward pay pressure. It's also an early warning about where the market's softening, and you guys should avoid, whoever you guys are, whoever's hiring should, not take as an aggressive stance from a comp policy standpoint, right?
I think it's really interesting in the when you mention the recruiters, because I think one thing that they've done better than comp is when they create their peer group per se, is they simply ask the question, where am I getting people and where are people leaving to?
Yeah.
Right? Like they make it pretty simple that way. And the nice thing about publicly available data is so far, I think it's been a little easier to create that scope of, I usually pick like retail or entry level, right? it's geographic based at what will, who will pay me the most for this, whether it's 19, 20, or $21. I don't care if it's in service, retail, shipping, like I don't care, right? And so that part I think is really interesting to show a scope of potentials where people might be able to move to. And again, where do I lose people and where am I getting people is, I think, harder with survey data to really nail down to hit the bullseye per se. You're kind of looking for is red in the middle? Is the next one yellow? Like,
Yeah. I
you're
think
trying
you're
to,
exactly right. I mean, I think if I look back over especially the last 3 or 4 years, recruiting teams in particular, but comp teams now also, the good comp teams, have really evolved their perspective of who are we competing against and who are we benchmarking against. And this is especially true for organizations that have what we call pay sensitive populations, typically hourly populations that will, legitimately move to an employer a mile away for an extra dollar an hour or even an extra 50 cents an hour. And those teams have to stay on top of who's hiring, like you said, like $19 to $21 an hour. What kinds of positions are those? We had a recruiting client that they had a machine shop up in the Rust Belt area that their standard, this was like 3 years ago, their standard starting rate for a spot welder was $15 an hour, an entry level spot welder. And I was like, I just drove through one of the fast food places, chain restaurants, and they were advertising first shift full time at 16 an hour. And so that's who they're competing against, right? And the folks that have to put food on the table and pay the rent and keep the lights on started caring a lot less about where they worked when those issues started to become a lot more pronounced. And so now companies are recognizing that just because we consider somebody a business competitor, that's not a competitor for our talent, and it's not where we should be benchmarking pay from.
so as you say all that, because we got the different sources, how do you see companies kind of sitting your data next to, integrating your data? We won't even talk about budget, just how do you see them? I know you said you had the survey piece, but um, how do you see companies using it?
It's still evolving. And by the way, there's a couple of other types of alternative data sources. Integrating it together is exactly the right term, is being able to look side by side at what's our own workforce, pay look like, what is survey based, what is surveys telling us, and then what is, uh, the advertised pay showing us, and being able to triangulate on where there are gaps and where there are opportunities for us. So a lot of times they do that manually right now. We're working to make it easier so that you don't have to do it as manually. The survey product I mentioned is one of those ways of doing it. We integrate in with a number of different technology tools that will allow you to treat advertised pay as another source to integrate into the same views and so forth. And frankly, if I were to project ahead for, another year, I think that when you start looking at the technology that's going to be released in the second half of 26, you're going to start to see a lot more of bringing in different types of data into the same environment so you can look across data types. Some of it's happening now. I think you're going to see it really accelerating.
How have you seen companies pay for it? And I say, because I generally have said, the
With
comp
cash.
department gets no headcount, no money every year, right? In general, so you mentioned like there's payroll data, there's just a myriad of additional sources of data out there now, and they don't have the same budget. So how have you seen people, A, doing that walk, and then B, probably a question for you and Paul, how have you seen them kind of flattening the curve if necessary around pay ranges and everything else? Because theoretically, I like the point, Paul, that you're different. It's different, right? I don't know if having the other sources made the answer right or wrong, but it's going to be different if I have other sources. So how do you see companies dealing with those issues?
So there's no question that the price points are coming down, but the audiences that use the data are getting much broader also. So as a business owner, the market potential for me was, it started 10 years ago. It was a small number of enterprises that would pay a lot of money for this kind of data. And now it's lots of folks that will pay a very little amount. And so our view is that for the data needs to be packaged and priced when it's for the comp audience at a level that's comparable to or slightly below what you're paid for surveys. So it's got to be just like another survey source. For other communities, though, it's got to be, even lower. And the most important thing is it can't be static data. There's lots of folks out there that sell like market reports and things like that, which are really interesting, but you put it in a recruiter's hands, you put it in a comp professional's hands,
Yeah, it's
and
old.
they don't, it's old, but also it's not as actionable. It's a macro data point. Even when it's localized data, it's just not, it's not as actionable. So having data that is more actionable is hugely important, and you should expect to pay a little bit more for that kind of data than just a report. And by the way, the price point on reports is going way down. Sean, we were talking about some of those price points before, and I know, that there are firms out there that provide what I would call static reports, and the value of those as reflected in their prices has dropped dramatically because there's so many different information sources. But if you want something that can integrate into your own tools, that's credible, that's from a really large, base of that's appropriately enriched, you're going to pay a bit more for that. But even there, the prices are a lot lower than what they were.
Are you
Yeah,
seeing
we're
it
gonna.
be an additive or replacement? Sorry, I just want to finish on it, Paul. Like,
Yeah.
are you seeing them go get more budget and say we need this because, or are you seeing them having to go through the process, comp departments being like, I had 3 surveys, 7 surveys, 8 surveys, and I got to pick one of those or the equivalent amount of spend there to now purchase your data like that. So for me, that's always the question. That's the biggest question I've been asking people is like, is it replacement? Or are you actually being able to go find ROI somehow and get more spend?
So in about 80 to 90% of the cases, it's not a wholesale replacement. What it is like you said, a lot of companies get data from multiple, survey providers. And so it's swapping out 1 or 2 of those seats for advertised pay survey data.
For about 80% of the people there, you're more politically correct than I am, Cary.
Yeah. So
Someone's not getting purchased so that they can replace. So basically, they're taking more of a traditional data set of their entire data set and swapping that out for another.
yeah, because there's a bit of redundancy in those, if they've got 10 different data sources, there's already some redundancy built in. And so they'll give up 1 or 2 seats there to bring in advertised pay rates. About 10 to 15% is new money. It's new money because there's been a pain point, or a business is growing to a point where they need to expand that. And so it's new money,
Yeah.
but it's not
Well,
a lot of new money.
I mean,
That's right.
I've told people, I personally, what I would do is buy a data set like yours, and I would move some of the other surveys to every other year because internal labor markets don't move at the same rate as the external labor market traditionally. So,
When we asked the market about budget utilization, this is a year and change ago, it would ironically 15% basically indicated that they thought they should add more money to their data portfolio. Half said it's a zero-sum game, and the remaining sort of 30% or so was like, yeah, I got to trim, if anything. Like, I'm spending too much. So
I've worked with HR leadership teams and been on HR leadership teams for 30 years now, and it's a zero-sum game. You're expected to deliver, more for the same, or, the same for less, or a lot of cases more for less every year.
That to me is always the hard part when we talk about this is
Yeah.
it's not like some other places, and maybe in some software places, Paul, where you can go say, here's the ROI, take the
yes.
time out, but true other ROI. In this case, I do think they have a budget and they're lucky if they get any small increase for whatever year over year. So they have to make do with what they have. And that to me is the cool, complex, fun problem to work, even though I don't have to work any of it for these companies here is
Mhm.
I mean, it used to be just surveys. Which surveys do I spend for X amount of dollars? And now there's a myriad of different data sources, and you have to go back and look at, how many hourly. Like I think the scrape data for hourly workers is amazing. It's legit a peer group of people posting out there, and generally, if there's a range at the retail store, it's like 17 to 18. Like it's not like a wide range, and a lot of times it just says starting at. And so, like, not saying your software is not good, Cary, but it'd be bad if it couldn't get the number right when it just has a number. And so I think there's a lot of validity there. And I think it's making the comp job harder to figure out where do I use that data and the mix, right? And how much do I weight these particular things? And to your
But if
point,
you're in the business where, you've got 80% of your workforce is hourly spread across a number of different locations, and you know that you're competing in each of those locations separately, you get really good. If you've got the data that you can work with, you get really good at figuring out how to apply that data because your business
That's your
depends
business.
on it. And that's how we look. And the other way we look is like, yes, there absolutely is, Paul, to your point, like what does it represent? mid to mid of, is it literally the, the lowest to the highest in the range, or is it mid to mid of two bands, that are in, or is it, and that's an evolving, so there's no standard practice there. But what doesn't evolve really fast is the mix of those practices. Right. So if you see a change quarter to quarter on advertise rates, you can be pretty confident that it's not because everybody just suddenly switched to, advertising a different set of ranges. It's because the range truly is moving. And so
Yeah, that's true.
it's, I think, much more responsive to especially local market conditions. So anyways, yeah.
So I guess, do you have other questions, Paul? I have two. I have one to kind of end with on this topic, if you don't have others.
No, I think you answered the key one I had, which, I mean, the big question I get from clients, and I have an answer, which I think you answered already, is should we treat this like a survey, right? To what extent does this, because everybody admits it's not the same, it's measuring something different. So should I be blending it in with my normal analysis, or do you keep it separate? You say, look, here's what the surveys say, and here's what the sort of ads say, is more of a comparison. I think what I heard you say is, well, it could be both, but there are organizations blending that together because they believe it to be sort of a helpful proxy.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah. So what we're seeing is, and the behavior varies depending on, the group and the use case. But for the comp teams, it should absolutely be, an expanded source. It shouldn't be a replacement to salary surveys, because they measure different things. They're curated in different ways. There's a ton of practices built around that. There are some people that are very loudly saying that surveys are outdated as a mode of measuring what is going on with pay. There are other ways to get at that. Like, you can take, feeds from payroll providers as a way of measuring that, if you can figure out how to normalize them.
Yes.
Because a lot of times they're just not documented, the way that allows you to compare like surveys can. But so there's an evolution there. But to say that incumbent-based pay, what employees are actually making now is not useful is, I think, an overreach for the comp community. The recruiting community, a lot of times, first of all, sadly, a lot of times recruiters and comp folks don't talk very effectively together. There's a little bit of dysfunction there. Not
There's
to
a lot of bit of
overgeneralize that.
dysfunction. They're measured on two different things. I think you're being politically correct,
Yeah.
but yeah.
And so I see more recruiters that are relying more heavily on advertised pay than survey pay, because of that dynamic. It's just not responsive enough to what they need. It's not transparent enough, and so forth. So recruiters, I think, are leaning more heavily into advertised pay.
Yeah,
But
that's fair.
do I think surveys, are not useful, and that do I think that advertised pay can replace what's in surveys? No, I don't think that.
Yeah, I think the bridge is going to get shorter between the two, because the more that pay is advertised, the more, to your point, internal people are looking at that. And they're going to have to get their story straight from a transparent. Like, there's just going to be enough noise when you're like, hey, I'm making, $50,000 a year, and I saw that, Paul left the company and you just posted his job and it's 70 to 85. I have questions. Like, I know I'm not a great performer, but like, that's really not a great performer. Like, what are the questions? And so I think it's going to bridge that gap, because it's always been this, like, talent acquisitions causing compression issues, to which I think talent acquisition said, I don't care. I measured by number of
Right.
recs
They have a
getting people
job.
in the
They got
door.
to fill
Yeah.
seats
So
in
like,
order
I just
to
don't
create the
think they were.
capacity to run the business.
But now I think it's going to get enough noise because of the transparency issues and some of the equity. I think there's enough, whether it's going to happen fast, I think there's enough converging issues that they'll get better. I don't think, I'm with you, I don't know that they'll ever love playing in the same sandbox, especially when their job is measured around number of recs filled and time to fill. That has nothing to do with long-term success and long-term proper pay. And so they just have adversarial goals, basically.
Yeah, I think that there's like incremental movement in terms of the value of different data sources and the capabilities associated with them. And there's a little bit of a push and pull that goes on with that. But if I were to think about, what's really going to be the driver of changes in terms of how companies need to look at pay and understand, how they set pay policies, I actually think AI is going to be driving a lot more of that than all the stuff that we're talking about. And so we're in the business of providing the data that's like what's happening in the world, but the adoption rate of, asking any of the different, AI platforms, what should I pay for somebody, is through the roof already. And when we talk about recruiters, especially, that's where they'll go the first time. So our challenge is, how do you make sure that the AI is trained off of really high quality data? And if you look at the kinds of answers you get now, and recognizing now is as bad as it's ever going to be when it comes to AI. And yesterday was as bad as it was ever going to be up until today, right? The data sources are really pretty poor and they're not really reliable, but that's going to change. And so our business is pretty focused on where the AI models that are going to be, that represent the right blend between a credible source going forward and something that's commercially viable for us. Because we could just turn all our data over to ChatGPT or to Gemini, and then we'd go out of business.
And we made it 40 minutes without saying the words AI. That's going to be tough
New
to beat.
record? New
Yeah,
record?
that's definitely going to be that could be an unbreakable record. I guess as we get near the end, Cary, if you had one if people are looking at alternative data sources, if you had one question you think they should put on an RFP or ask a vendor to make sure they're quality, like what is that question? Because there's so many to curate. Like what do I ask?
Well, I can't stick to any boundaries. So I would say, where do you get your data from specifically and how do you enrich it specifically? The key is the specifics, right? Because people will give you whitewashed answers that sound really good. You have to click down to understand what's really going on, when it comes to data collection and data enrichment. And if you don't understand that, you're just basically blindly accepting what somebody else gives you that could just be a black box.
Yeah. Well, I had that conversation with someone the other day, like, oh, but this provider has 10 million data points. And I'm like, you do realize that that's a really small number compared to like
I was going to
workers
say
in the
10
world.
million.
Oh, but it also that number, I hate that number. And I say that because, I can make that number as big as I need it to be by adding, each row as a data point. Like,
and you only need about 30 companies to get there. Like if they're the right 30 companies. So is that like so I think your point, Cary, is the right one, which is like, what's the sample? Like you're never going to have the whole world's worth. Even, you've got a big data set. It's not the whole world's worth of data. So it's what are those sources and how representative are they of the market I want to measure? And if they're all sourced from big enterprise tech companies and I'm a manufacturer in southern Wisconsin, who cares? Right? Whereas if it's got a portfolio approach and I have confidence that it can accurately estimate, what to pay a welder in southern Wisconsin. Like, okay, now I feel better about that. But it's not the size of the data is never going to be big enough that you can just trust it. You have to inspect it so that like, is there bias in the collection mechanism, the normalization mechanism that makes it less relevant to me? Because that's a real problem with surveys even still to this day, where people don't really understand sort of those bias effects that can occur based on who's in the sample.
I mean, we haven't brought it up, but the variation across surveys is amazing. These are touted as, tightly curated, very well controlled. The world's best thinkers are, the best experts around on comp benchmarking and yet you lay two surveys next to each other and look at exactly the same job in exactly the same markets, and you can get 10 to 20% variances across those, and they should be exactly the same. And so you're exactly right for all the reasons that you just said. We have yet to see anybody who will trust any advertised data without taking a look at it specifically for free and diving into it. And so, one of our challenges as a business is how do we make it easier for folks to do that?
Yeah.
I'll add on. I think having a quick discussion or in-depth discussion potentially on the job architecture that they've got underlying, that they have some thought and rigor going into normalizing the data.
Mm-hmm.
And that to me is something, especially if you're going to eventually set that side by side or blend that with others, that piece to me is kind of critical too. And the only thing I'll add there is I tell people, get greedy. Having been on the vendor side forever, like I've never, I say never, rarely do you ever get upset if a client comes back and says, well, explain why, right? Because if they can't explain why, that's probably not someone you want to work with. And so I like that, Cary, like really dig into the data. Don't take one piece of data and go. I'll broaden way out. If you could auto-magically fix anything in HR, not just the data, what would it be?
So there's lots.
If only,
so let me
AI
credentialize
read his
my view
right then, because I just saw like that was the moment we really wanted to capture, and the professional filter got 100% in the way of that, Cary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I started working with HR organizations back in, I hate to say it, in 1994. And in the meantime, I've worked as both a consultant, for a number of those years as executive responsible for these things. And if there's one thing that like is an instant triggering thing for me, so there's one very triggering thing, and then I will add to it one very big picture thing. The triggering thing is anytime I hear somebody say that HR needs a seat at the table, or you do this because HR can get a seat at the table, and it, like that battle was won or lost 20 years ago. And so anybody who's still talking about HR having a seat at the table, you are part of the problem. I'm speaking to those people right now. The problem is with you, it is not with the HR profession.
Yeah.
Or possibly it's with the organization you're in which case you're not set up to thrive there and you should think about being somewhere else. So that is like a instant indicator of kind of a serious issues with whoever is talking or the organizations are coming from for me. So I wish that would just be purged from the vocabulary of the entire HR profession. The second thing, though, which is something that was really frustrating personally to me, is I wish companies would really hold HR accountable to treat the talent asset of the company as an asset just like anything else. So for example, and let me give you an example there, like we would fight for budget around analytics that would solve really cool problems like around identifying low performing managers, and where you could reduce turnover by 1 or 2 positions that would have a net impact on a company, of 1 or 2x of a typical salary. Well, in an HR budget, that's kind of a big deal, even though those positions aren't coming from your own budget, but you can make a business case around that. But if you're a board of directors of an organization that's got tens of thousands of people, I don't care about that kind of problem. What I care about is how can I get 10% more productivity over the entire workforce? And to be honest with you, most HR organizations, even the ones that are viewed with the highest regard and have the highest strategic capability, are not at the forefront of solving what I call big picture problems, big money problems around maximizing the value of the talent asset in the organization. The HR traditionally is not allowed to have that kind of position, but more importantly, HR and top management haven't really framed the opportunities in a way that puts HR in a leading position there, I think. And so, I mean, if you have an asset that's a manufacturing asset, like a plant, you're going to look at the return on that, the return on that asset, and you're going to measure it very finely. If you have an asset that represents 50 to 90% of your cost structure, which is what people do, it's not managed anywhere close to that at all. And HR has had the opportunity for 25 years, at least, to bring that perspective to the table. And it's been shut down. It's really tough to get people to adopt that mindset, but HR hasn't been equipped to bring that mindset either, I think. And I wish that would actually change. I think you would see enormous innovation, enormous productivity, enormous kind of career satisfaction among, employees everywhere if that really was the approach that companies and HR leaders took. A lot of people will say, Cary, we do that. I'm like, no, you don't. You don't actually. You do not.
Elements of it, but yeah, there's certainly like the level of rigor, the constant attention, the willingness to invest, I think is another, that's I think a different spin I just heard from you than I've heard from others. No, you'll actually unlock better outcomes for the people, for the asset, if you treat it like an asset, not a cost, an asset. And that unlocks the willingness to maintain, the willingness to upgrade, the willingness to buy a better version if it creates a better return. Like all those questions that if you're buying a machine, you're going to ask, whereas we don't always ask them on the human
It's wrapped
side.
up in all kinds of like leadership dysfunctions too. I'll give you an example. There was an assignment that I was a sponsor for, where we had a client that the board was putting a lot of pressure because they were not seeing gender representation at the top leadership level, and they weren't seeing ethnic representation starting at the mid-management levels and above. And we were tasked to go in and look at, is there any insights on what's going on here? And the problem was basically a workforce migration problem that was pretty straightforward to solve. You basically track people's careers and their pay, from the time they come in until, when they leave, and watch what career choices they make along the way, and then you segment it out by gender and ethnicity. And it was really clear. I mean, a lot of the typical findings that, women would start to move out of operations and commercial roles at a certain point. That's not particularly, especially unique to one company or another. Ethnicity, you'd start to see them decide to move out of the company at a certain point, which was unique to the company. But the thing that you could do even beyond that was you could isolate it down and say which parts of the company are driving this. And it was very clear that you could count the number of kind of senior level leaders where this was the biggest issue on one hand and have a few fingers left over. And as soon as that finding was presented to the project's sponsors, they said, "Thank you very much. We'll be in touch," and they killed the project.
That's a
And that was the
sad.
end
That's
of
a
that.
sad way to. That, yeah, geez, that's just
Downer.
But
yeah.
right. And
Downer.
so, but it's, back to the point of it's a complex issue in terms of why aren't companies getting the most out of their investment in their talent, and why aren't they treating it with the same level of sophistication and rigor and diligence as they do with other assets. And there's just a lot of dysfunction that can get built into that, and a lot of preconceived notions about what's important for leadership.
That's
So,
true. Before we go, Cary, I don't know if you know the rule. We probably didn't tell you, but if you wear company swag on here, you have to send us swag.
well, you already have swag. I
Yeah.
know. I've given you a hat, Paul. I'm happy to.
I'm missing out, I think.
Yeah.
Next time you come down for a
And
CCA
in
event.
fact, I'll like go. I'll raise that. I'll even offer to the audience that if you subscribe to one of our products, I will throw in a free hat just for you.
There was a big if there, just to be clear.
There's a
but
big qualifying factor. Well, I really appreciate it, Cary, coming on. This is great. I mean, it's so timely and everything else. So this is
Super.
great. And obviously, people will be great if they follow us on here. And Cary is easy to find on LinkedIn, and always happy to jam on this stuff. So feel free to reach out, and maybe you can finagle a hat. Maybe you can't if you reach out to him, but you can definitely talk about data sources and data. And the one thing I really appreciate, Cary, when I've spoken to you is you always give me the good of what's going on with the data and your products, and also the cons and the limitations. And you're very open with that. So I really appreciate that. And I find it really educational.
Yeah. Thanks for your time, Cary.
It's always
thanks a
fun to
lot.
talk with you guys.
Yeah.
So,
Thank you.
all right.